Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ethics for Blockchain Lawyers. My name is Yev Muchnik, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Cohen.
How do you do, everyone?
We are incredibly excited to be here for another year of this amazing hackathon, and have been. I know we're in the last lot, so thanks for bearing with us on Friday. But we have this really exciting topic to share with you and educate you on. So by way of background, I am a technology attorney based out of Denver, Colorado. My firm is called Launch Legal. I specialize in corporate and securities law. Have been advising clients in this space for about the last 4 to 5 years. I myself sort of tripped into it like a lot of others, but just very randomly. I don't have a particularly compelling story, but it became very compelling once I saw the body of law and regulatory environment that was burgeoning around this area. So it got more and more exciting as the years have progressed, and also much more mature, obviously, than we were sitting at the hackathon 3 years ago, which was just amazing to begin with. So I'll pass it on to Louis to introduce himself.
Sure, Yev. Thank you so much, and hello, everyone. And as Yev said, thank you for bearing with to the end of the hackathon. I couldn't be more pleased to be here. I'm a co-founder of DLX Law. We have offices in New York, Wilmington, Delaware, and Washington, D.C., where I'm not really, but sort of, kind of. Like Yev, I kind of stumbled into the practice a little bit different because I spent much of my career as a large firm lawyer at one of the largest firms in the world for many years. And so I think I bring a particularly different kind of perspective as at a big boutique firm, but also having spent many, many years in big law, and really excited to talk about some of the ethical issues that come up in our practice and to share the stage with Yev, who's terrific. So let's get going.
Yay. So just I guess before we get into an overview of our discussion today, I think it's important to highlight again how pervasive blockchain is across so many different industries, and these are just a few examples. But really, I think a lot of people dismiss it or conflate it with crypto, as I'm sure has been on a number of discussions today already. But just as the industry has matured, so has the technology and the applications and the use cases. So obviously, fintech and decentralized finance and securities are massively hot topics at the moment. There's tons of activity in the space with capital markets, asset management, payment and remittances, banking and finance, insurance, et cetera. Obviously, with securities, I think as securities attorneys, we talk about this ad nauseum and kind of the issuance of compliant securities, and then the existence of tokens that don't fall within that definition. So obviously energy as well. There are smart contracts and systems interoperability that are happening in rooftop solar, electric vehicles, smart metering. There are a number of new business models that have emerged for energy markets, real-time data management, and moving carbon credits using the blockchain. The DLT gives us a lot of efficiencies for utility providers and tracking chain of custody. Also in wholesale electricity distribution. I think energy is kind of an interesting one that doesn't get as much attention as fintech and securities. But then also obviously music, all of the beautiful features that blockchain brings, which include removing the middleman and connecting the source of content, for example, in this industry, and being able to provide additional revenue streams for artists, but also protecting copyright and distribution. Intellectual property, also topic dear to heart, but just registering and clearing IP rights, controlling and tracking the distribution of unregistered and registered intellectual property, providing of evidence of genuine or first use in trade or commerce, which is incredibly important for protecting your IP. Just general digital rights management, enforcing IP agreements, transmitting payments in real time for IP transactions, and then authentication and governance and detection and retrieval of counterfeit, stolen, and imported goods. In the supply chain, that's also sort of a ubiquitous kind of application, but Walmart and IBM are doing a lot in the in ag and food safety sector. There's also authentication in fashion, in diamonds, in wine, and coffee, all across the board, really. Real estate was really one of the initial adopters of blockchain, and it still makes a lot of sense for a use case, for in project finance, asset tokenizing, and fractional ownership, putting land registries and property data on the blockchain, allowing for instances of liquidity when you do have fractional ownership, and then also land records. Healthcare is another good one, medical and health records, providing a lot of transparency through the use of the blockchain, being able to track counterfeit drugs, clinical trials, digital identities, etc. And then government. So with smart cities popping up and kind of being able to connect everything into under kind of the advancement of that technology, but also, central banking. The government is notoriously slow and outdated in its adoption, unfortunately, but there are states like Wyoming, there are states like Colorado, there are states like, I guess on some level, New York, that are pushing the way here with voting, with state and national digital currencies, with customs tracking, with interagency data management, digital identity, and then future of work as well has also tied into government use cases. So we are presenting to the audience, theoretically, we're presenting to an audience of lawyers. And the question is, what is the lawyer's role in advising clients in these situations? This is a bit of an outdated quote, but often cited, and I think important to reiterate and reflect on. So Jay Clayton notoriously said that the role of the lawyer is as gatekeeper. And it's really, this was in the context of issuing ICOs back in the era of the ICO craze in 2017. But really as somebody who provides professional services and who has that knowledge of what is allowed to be placed in the market and sort of being a protector of investors. That's really the role of these securities regulators, is not to kind of flood the market with a lot of fluke unregistered securities and have them flop, which unfortunately was the case for a lot of ICOs from that period. But the SEC does, there are a number of past actions by the SEC prior to ICOs. So when lawyers would churn out opinion letters to support trading in microcap and then penny stocks as well. And they do have a long history. The SEC's enforcement goes way back in terms of pursuing lawyers in cases where the SEC thinks that the lawyer knowingly or recklessly has advised the client to engage in activities that would violate the Securities Act.
So I'll pick up here. We put a little graphic up because you got to have graphics. And as someone like Yev, who's been practicing in this area a long time, I would advise those of you who are listening and watching, who are looking at the space and who perhaps haven't spent as much time in it, one of the most important things from the point of view of keeping up with your ethical responsibilities is to keep your eyes open at all times working in this space. I think anyone who's been a practitioner has encountered unfortunately, a variety of circumstances where ethical duties are called into question. And it is just the reality that where innovation occurs, you see a range of different folks. And yet you described the many ways very, very, very well and thoroughly that blockchain technology can be used in constructive economic commerce. Unfortunately, and all of us understand this, there are also many ways that, particularly in the world of crypto and tokens, that the technology can be used to scam people or take advantage, or just by folks who are perhaps lazy and did not audit their code or do other things. So, being knowledgeable about the underlying technology, which I believe is a key part of keeping your eyes open, and then watching out for bad actors of all shapes and sizes is extremely important, and we'll get into a little more detail on that. Next slide. Okay, I think Yev, you're going to walk us through the overview.
Yep. So just going back to the overview of what we're hoping to accomplish in the next 40 minutes or so, as to the things that an attorney should be out on the lookout for, and then topical issues. Accepting cryptocurrency as payment in exchange for legal services, and this is akin to sort of an equity in lieu of compensation type arrangement, or taking a business stake in a project or a company. Also holding cryptocurrency in trust for clients, whether that is as an advance retainer or whether that is in trust in an escrow type situation. Some of the AML KYC considerations, anti-money laundering, and know your client considerations that pertain to attorneys, and whether they do in fact pertain to attorneys in advising clients in the blockchain space. Also, just a couple of securities law updates, some very exciting ones. The emergence of legal smart contracts, and then the continuing existence and development of self-executing smart contracts. Also decentralized finance, and just a note to corporate counsel on how they can manage enterprise risk management and with all of these issues that are being covered. So there was an excellent DC bar ethics opinion that just recently came out, to the effect that the attorneys cannot hold back the tides of change. And in reality, up until this point, there was only one state that had issued an ethics opinion, which was Nebraska. We'll get into that a little bit later, but as it stands right now, there are 4 states that have issued ethics opinions on the acceptance of cryptocurrency, of digital currency, and guidance on how attorneys need to handle it and what to do with it. I'll note that the 4 states being North Carolina, Nebraska, New York, and the District of Columbia. I'll note that the North Carolina opinion stated, and it's not, unfortunately, I should have put it on as a slide, but quote, "The bulk of people we know regard Bitcoin as shady money, and they may well regard lawyers accepting Bitcoin as shady lawyers. Will Bitcoin be legitimized one day in the eyes of average Joes and Janes? Maybe, but not soon." So it gives you a little bit of color, maybe not so surprising, but yeah, really the District of Columbia bar ethics opinion is more in line where we stand now, and sort of meeting the needs of clients and modernizing our practice, but also having the appropriate guidance to do so ethically.
Great. So I'll pick up, from here. As I'm sure most attorneys know, The first place to turn when you have ethical questions is to the ABA model rules, and of course your own state's enactment of the model rules, which may or may not have different versions to them. Probably one of the most important places to look is ABA model rule 1.5, the prohibition on unreasonable fees. And for most lawyers, your first contact with ethics and blockchain, as Yev, you just noted, was in connection of, hey, can I even accept cryptocurrency for payment of my fees? I'm kind of interested. I have my own crypto, which I own perhaps, and I want to do that. Well, one of the things that again needs to be thought about is the position in Nebraska. And as you noted, Yev, although there are probably relatively few folks on who are actually admitted in Nebraska, the fact that they issued this advisory opinion is helpful, and at least a touch point for lawyers who are in the space. What is important to understand is, first, what is the nature of the transaction in which cryptocurrency is being received? How are the client being treated? Is the client being treated fairly, et cetera? The Internal Revenue Service, as many of us know at this point, considers the IRS, considers virtual currencies to be property goods. And so that puts a certain question from a tax point of view into how the cryptocurrency would be treated. The practical matter is when you're dealing, and we'll talk about some of the other cryptocurrencies, but at this point, even if the cryptocurrency is property, as long as a relationship is understood and reasonable and does not necessarily involve a business transaction, and we'll talk about that in a moment, then a lawyer should be able to, generally speaking, accept at least a well understood cryptocurrency as a form of payment. We'll talk in a couple of moments as to retainers, where there are different considerations that need to be made when you are holding the cryptocurrency but not actually receiving it on your own behalf. So those are important considerations. In terms of reasonableness, the arrangement immediately calls into question the valuation of the cryptocurrency. So the most liquid cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, should pretty clearly have an ascertainable market value, such that if you have determined a level of fees, your receipt of the Bitcoin should have a clear market value, such that you can determine that the fees that you are charging are actually reasonable in light of the services that you are providing. If you have $10,000 worth of services, you can readily ascertain what $10,000 worth of Bitcoin are and receive that. With other cryptocurrencies, the value of the cryptocurrency may not be as clear, and it may raise questions as to whether and what the actual nature of your transaction was. The lawyer may even be able to take advantage of a client, although that's probably less likely direction it goes, but you could receive a cryptocurrency with a much greater value than the dollar value of your services, and that would probably be a very legitimate cause for concern. Under ABA Model Rule 1.8, there are limitations on the ability of a law firm to enter a business transaction with a client. And the New York City Bar Association, which Yev, you alluded to before, found that lawyers should meet the requirements of Model Rule 1.8a when there's an agreement to accept cryptocurrency as the only payment method. I think the concern, of course, being that you are in some way entering into a venture where the value of the cryptocurrency in question is part of a business transaction with the client. For most of us, that's probably not what we seek to do. And, our recommendation, probably if you were considering this, is to have payment in cryptocurrency be an option for the client. and one that they can choose either to pay with fiat currency or major cryptocurrencies, rather than setting up a business arrangement with ongoing payments in a particular cryptocurrency, the value of which may fluctuate, and it may appear, especially if the client has a large amount of the cryptocurrency in question, as looking like a business venture, and even in a worst case scenario, assistance in some way of facilitating laundering of the cryptocurrency through the legal services, which obviously would be catastrophically bad and not at all desirable. So next slide. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So no, that's forward slide. Forward, Toby.
I'm sorry, there's a bit of
no worries. No worries at all.
Ooh, it's delayed. 1 second.
Yeah, I know I'm always amused being in the cutting edge of technology and then being reminded how the most basic elements of technology can somehow defeat us. There we go. Okay, we're moving ahead. Okay, so some other considerations that should be taken into account. And we'll talk more as I had alluded, but retention of a given cryptocurrency by counsel as a retainer does raise particular concerns, and we'll talk about that. As a general matter, I would say that's probably something that should be avoided. Some of the ethical considerations that have gone on around cryptocurrencies had to do with the payment of transaction costs associated with the transfer of the cryptocurrency. The client is going to, if there is a transaction cost associated, in particular, for example, as many of you will know, with Ethereum, the gas cost on a smart contract can be very high. You're probably not using a smart contract to implement the payment of fees, but it's something to take into account. In any event, that should be borne by the party holding the funds, not the client. So you shouldn't, for example, it would be concerning if you set up a process whereby you were paid in a particular cryptocurrency and then set up some more complex arrangement because you thought you were being clever and caused the client to be responsible for the transaction fees of that smart contract or other more complex arrangement. For example, a smart contract based escrow, that would probably be concerning at this point from an ethical point of view. The other consideration that's always, kind of out there are major cryptocurrencies forking. Since the Ethereum fork in, I guess, 2018, there has not, we have not seen a lot of that. We also saw, of course, Bitcoin give off a couple of other tokens, but there are concerns if you happen to be holding a cryptocurrency for a client and there is a fork. There are a lot of questions. Is that sort of looked at from a more traditional point of view as a dividend? Should the airdropped or forked alternative cryptocurrency go back to the client? I would just urge folks to be as conservative as possible should something like that occur. Also, finality is always something that anyone who's familiar with cryptocurrency needs to take into account. They're not only waiting a reasonable number of blocks to consider a transaction final, but making sure that they're, in whatever cryptocurrency is being used, that there are no finality issues and that the transaction has settled. And that's important to take into account. And there's a great piece, and I think you had alluded to this, which we cite by a gentleman writing for the Virginia State Bar Ethics Journal back in 2018 that asked the question, is it ethical for lawyers to accept Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? And would certainly recommend it to people, as we would recommend the New York City Bar advisory opinion that I referred to earlier, which came out last summer, and we have a link for you for that. And I think the slides are going to be available, I'm sure, after the fact, so nobody needs to scribble that down. Let's go to the next slide. Great. So here we just put up some other useful resources in terms of accepting cryptocurrencies that we would put down. The last, I think everyone should read the last bullet point there, which is an article by a gentleman named John Reed Stark, who has been a consistent hawk on the topic of blockchain in general and crypto in particular. And he's got a lot of thoughtful writings. And although I would not agree with him on most of his conclusions, you cannot argue that he's not a thoughtful commentator. And I think all lawyers practicing in the space would really benefit from reading his thoughts and taking into account the concerns that he raises, even if I think sometimes they're a little overheated. He is absolutely thoughtful and a serious guy. And again, it's as a lawyers, it's our duty to understand what the other side of arguments are and what the concerns are. So I would particularly commend folks to find this particular site and then also some of his other writings, just to make sure you understand some of the concerns that can be raised as a blockchain lawyer dealing with cryptocurrencies. Next slide. Okay, so I think we'll just run through this one quickly. Again, since we can't look out into the audience and see how experienced folks are, we did Yev and I put together a quick taxonomy of crypto and basically working from things that people probably most comfortable with down to where there are other concerns. For Bitcoin and Ether, I think at this point, we know of many legal practices that do accept Bitcoin and Ether, and that does not, I think, based on the relatively limited ethical guidance, but still pretty clear, that doesn't, I think, raise particular ethical concerns. In that, in terms of the other sort of what I call mainstream cryptos, that's certainly possible. Those are Ripple, XRP, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, Stellar Lumens. Those are highly liquid tokens that typically would only come up if the client was very long that particular token anyway and wanted to give some of that token to you. Certainly, I think a little bit more scrutiny into the transaction is important, and in particular, bearing in mind the New York City opinion raising concerns about business arrangements under 1.8a. But I think generally speaking, those are going to be okay. In column 3, we put what we see are the frequently traded utility tokens, and I put quotes around the word utility because there's a lot of securities law concerns we'll come to hopefully very shortly on these. Those are the basic attention token of the Brave browser, DOT, the token that powers Polkadot, which is an interoperability network, Link, which is very popular now for Chainlink, and it's Oracle, ADA or ADA, which is Cardano's native token, and EOS, of course, the large smart contract platform. So all of those are out there, and in theory, I think could be accepted. They're not, although I put frequently, they're not all that frequently traded, and the liquidity and the pricing of these tokens are probably concerning. So generally speaking, I would say probably stay away from those unless there's really a compelling need to accept legal payment in one of those. The dollar-based stablecoins, USDC, Circles, True USD, Pax, dollar coin, etc. Gemini has a coin as well. Those generally should not be problematic, and so in many ways they can be a nice way of adding a little bit of crypto into your practice if you don't already. Tether and DAI, as folks may know, are very special cases. Tether is the subject of an ongoing New York Attorney General investigation, and we don't know where that's going to come out, but there's a lot of concern there. I would just say stay away. DAI, of course, is a synthetic stablecoin created by Maker. It's a very interesting project and it deserves tremendous credit. However, in terms of accepting for legal fees, I would again stay away. There are a lot of concerns there. The privacy coins, likewise, Monero, XMR, and Zcash, both, that is where if you're going to sort of get a finger pointed at you, even though I think as lawyers, if we both support privacy, those are probably things to stay away from. And then the other top 100 coins, probably just say no, as with new and bespoke tokens. Okay, let's keep going.
I'm actually going to opt to break it up a little bit here and be in the middle and ask you, Louis, whether you accept crypto in exchange for legal services, and how long you've been doing it, and just some of the do you truly kind of follow your own prescription and stay away from all these, or early on did you kind of make some more riskier calls on some of these?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we always think about OPSEC in crypto, but somebody else on our team handles that, so I don't feel too bad in talking about it. But yes, we have. It's a great question. It's a fair question. Yes, we do in our standard retainer letter, more or less as I described, give clients an option to pay in the major cryptocurrencies. For us, for our purposes, that's Bitcoin and Ether. We don't generally and have resisted accepting other tokens. I think if someone came to us and wanted to pay in one of the stable coins I mentioned, I think we'd be fine with that. But that hasn't simply come up for us yet. We are happy with that. We do fairly extensive KYC on our clients in advance if they're not people that are personally known to us over a long period of time. And even then, we certainly do some KYC on that. But one thing I would just add, Yev, is that we're very concerned if we're accepting Bitcoin from a wallet we don't know, from a client we don't know. We're usually pretty cautious about that and prefer money to flow through the traditional banking system, which has a lot of safeguards, of course, on payment movements. We would also be very reluctant to accept a large payment in either Bitcoin or Ether for a variety of reasons as well.
Likewise, and I echo all of that and take on all of the same practices, actually. I mean, I will have to admit that early on, or circa 2017, it was sort of just like, well, maybe, you just don't know. But I did also sort of stay with the traditional Bitcoin and Ethereum payment options. So, and it will be very exciting once the banks have more control over that, and there will be more scrutiny. And on some level, I know that's a very out there statement to make as well, but yeah, there will be some more controls. But yeah, in terms of holding digital currency and digital assets in trust for clients, a lot of the topics that I'll cover here do overlap with what Lewis just spoke about as well. But in general, trust money is client money until it's actually earned by the attorney. So that was in the case in the matter of Sather case. And really the client should be receiving the benefit of any appreciation. So some of the similar considerations around whether your particular jurisdiction or federally the digital currency is considered as property or currency, and if it's property, then you may not deposit it into your attorney trust account, your COLTAF or IOLTA account. And if it's property, then you have to safeguard the client's property in a way that doesn't commingle it with anything else, and with the appropriate safeguards. So any kind of advance fees that are paid to an attorney for their services remains the property of the client. So just some considerations around kind of similar to what Lewis had said. If you are accepting digital currency, what is the valuation? And at which point do you need to exchange it? And so based on that Nebraska ethics opinion, their guidance is that you have to, the exchange must take place immediately. But then it also kind of touches upon objective market rates, right? At which point is it immediate? Is it at 11:59? And since those kind of markets don't have the same kind of cutoff as traditional markets, there are still some gray areas there. But in general, I think the underlying guidance is that there needs to be some objectivity. There needs to be disclosure. If you are a custodian holding digital currency for others, and that should all be very specifically described in your engagement letter and allocate the particular responsibilities, your tax obligations, as Lewis just mentioned, any kind of KYC compliance that you opt to do as a firm, and and address any kind of third party payer obligations or relationships as well. And then again, the other consideration is which we'll talk about some more, but is security, and where do you store if you do decide to accept the digital currency on behalf of the client and you don't convert it straight away. You obviously have to be very mindful about the security of your wallet, whether it's a cold wallet or a hot wallet or any other kind of considerations there in terms of signatories there too. So as a firm itself. And then just in the situation, for example, in an M&A situation, right, where there is a need for escrowing funds prior to closing, or there's a gap in between those times, again, you would treat that, if it was digital currency, you would treat that as property, and it would be kind of the same fiduciary obligations, and would commingling and make sure that the record keeping requirements are met. I'm stumbling on words, excuse me. So that is the gist of holding digital currency in trust for your clients, and just in summary, that you should convert into fiat if you are putting it into a trust account rather than holding it as in the form of digital currency. And again, just kind of going back, but because you can't, I mean, just thinking about refunding it for any unused portion. So it just seems very logical. Lewis, if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just quickly, I think, those are all great points. My view really on this one here is, because of the potential confusion on the part of a client, if there were price appreciation, while the Bitcoin, was, after it had been received for the retainer, but of course converted into dollars, and then later, if it appreciated quite a lot, you might be holding the dollars, and the client would say, well, somehow the law firm is responsible for the appreciation of the property, which is exactly what some of this is going at. So I personally think, and at least our practice is not even to allow or the client to provide retainers or in crypto, or put it the other way. At least our practice is that all retainer payments, even if they're going to be converted by us, would otherwise have been converted by us, should be just in dollars. So just to avoid any potential, for confusion around these questions. That's a great analysis. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks for the addition. Right. So again, the question is, what role do we play as gatekeepers, right? Going back to gatekeepers in the issuance of securities, do we have an additional role as gatekeepers in terms of AML and KYC compliance? And the general understanding is that we, outside of facilitating or aiding in money laundering, we do not have a responsibility or an obligation to vet our clients with the kind of KYC AML standards and requirements that banks do, obviously. So, and that primarily for the reasons of attorney-client confidentiality and privilege, and safeguarding those kind of well-known principles and tenets of that relationship, which are very important. The Financial Action Task Force has called for higher standards for non-financial businesses and professions, which includes lawyers. But as of now, that's only been guidance rather than kind of law. And the ABA has also followed in that line, qualifying it as voluntary good practices rather than kind of an enforcement mechanism against lawyers. But obviously there are instances in these kind of situations, like Lewis said, law firms do move large sums of money from their trust accounts for transactions across state lines, across internationally. And so there is an international call, and Cal did a wonderful presentation just prior to us on this subject, that we do have to be on alert on a lot of levels, and just follow some internal voluntary good practices, which are more in line with just kind of general ethics and professional responsibility measures that are provided by the state bars and the ABA. And again, just acting as an intermediary or escrow agent for digital assets as exchange between parties. So there are bad actors in this space, and I think it would be easy to target a firm as sort of a way to wash kind of the genesis of where those funds flow from, and unknowingly to the firm or the lawyers, or not having those kind of policies in place, it would be easy to come into that kind of position, and then again be subject to sort of as a provider to be subject to other sanctions.
Absolutely. I'll just pick up on that quickly, Yev, because it's a real issue for lawyers that are active in the space. It's been a little less more recently, but there was a period, Yev, when we were being contacted sometimes as often as once or twice a month by people who wanted us to facilitate an escrow arrangement involving, a large, quote unquote, OTC transfer of Bitcoin, very often, with one or more Asian parties involved who was a minor, ostensibly, whatever. And there were large fees promised and very concerning. Obviously, I think for most folks would raise red flags, but, to be concerned. And then we've also had prospective clients contact us about doing similar activity where the client was being asked to function as the type of escrow agent Yev, you just described, and were, asked us for our advice on that. And it's generally was, really just run screaming. If it's a small amount of fees, you should forego it. And if it's a large amount of fees, then you should really forego it. That's sort of my advice. Anyway, we could go to the next slide.
That's a good measuring stick. Yeah.
Yeah.
I smiled while you were telling that story. I remember having one of my clients, he was working on a project in Singapore, and he was contacted about a large Bitcoin investment into the project that never, unfortunately, got off the ground. But they flew him to, I think it was Germany or somewhere, and had asked somebody else to act as an agent. But it was just there's all in this industry, I guess it's riddled with these stories that you would just never believe. And back to Lewis's one of his that original slide, you just have to keep your eyes wide open.
Yep.
Right? You have to be aware that anything that even the slightest whiff of impropriety, then as an attorney, you advise your clients not to proceed, and then you potentially terminate that engagement as well if they do, not follow your advice.
Yeah. So I guess, Yev, I think I was going to pick this one up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of securities law, and you did a great job at the outset of kind of sketching this out, this is one of the areas where ethical concerns, after the acceptance of cryptocurrencies for the payment of fees, probably takes the greatest center stage here. So as most of you will be aware, once it became clear that digital tokens could be created very easily, then it did not take folks long to realize that they could be sold for a profit, and people could be induced to buy them based on promises of future appreciation. And once that sort of light bulb all went off in 2014 into 2015, this idea started to percolate. And as most of you will know, in the summer of 2017, the SEC released what they referred to as the Section 21A Dow report. Section 21A is where the SEC, where it chooses not to actually take an affirmative enforcement action, but nevertheless wants to make the market aware of concerns, can issue reports to the market specifically about potential for future enforcement actions. And the report covered the Dow, which again most will be familiar with, and raised concerns. The unique nature of the DAO, relatively speaking, particularly until this past summer, where decentralized, autonomous organizations become more popular, lulled many lawyers into a false sense of security that whatever the SEC's concerns were with the DAO, they didn't apply to whatever particular transactions that lawyer was working on and making a lot of money off of. And so even after the summer of 2017, we continued to see lawyers advising clients about sales of digital assets, then the fact that these sales did not trigger the implication of U.S. securities laws. Toward the end of 2017, a second enforcement action, there were a couple of others that preceded it, that largely involved fraud, but an enforcement action involving a smartphone app called Munchie really, I think, opened folks' eyes and made it clear that the SEC considered even non-fraudulent distributions of tokens to potentially be securities offerings. And of course, this is really where lawyers came to the fore, and that quote, Yev, that you read earlier, became important. All of these transactions, generally speaking, or the vast majority, had a law firm involved because they were complex. And I was certainly involved in transactions around this time, as were many of you listening, perhaps. But at that point, the gatekeeper liability issue really arose, and the SEC recognized that most of those transactions could not occur were it not for the enablement of law firms who were giving either informal advice, formal advice, potentially even legal opinions, that the securities laws were not implicated by these transactions. And after Munchie, certainly our firm's perspective was that any token distribution probably needed to be discussed with the SEC directly to address those issues. There were subsequent enforcement actions, which this is not our main purpose of this discussion on ethics, involving, for example, an ostensibly decentralized exchange known as Ether Delta, and a number of others, which were very strategic by the SEC to try and highlight potential other misuses of digital currencies and blockchain technology, and to make clear a kind of perimeter of concern. And any lawyer practicing in the space needs to be very familiar with those so that they can advise their clients. And then finally, and I see we slightly misnumbered, my bad, the last point here, there were major enforcement actions against two very large and very prominent sales of digital assets by Telegram, the messaging company, and Kik, the social media company. Telegram ended ultimately in a judgment that enforced an injunction against the sale of their tokens, and ultimately a settlement by Telegram with the SEC. Kik continues to be ongoing, but those are important touchstones. Any lawyer practicing anything that remotely relates to securities, giving securities advice in this space, needs to be very familiar with those, and certainly, I think, in regular contact with the key people at FinHub at the SEC, who are, kind of helping to direct the commission's sort of enforcement activity and where permissions can be granted. Decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, which most folks who are listening probably are familiar with, present fascinating legal questions. One of the reasons why you have probably lawyers like you and I and others, got involved in this space, they raise questions. Can a DAO be potentially have the status of a legal person? Right now, there are people creating quote unquote legal DAOs, or trying to use well-known or existing types of entities like limited liability companies and otherwise to give legal personhood to a group of developers or others who are using basically smart contract technology that exists only in the blockchain network to create, valid and binding legal arrangements. This is a fascinating area. There's some great folks out there. I'll call out one lawyer who I think is just at the peak of practice in this, Ross Campbell. Also, Professor Aaron Wright at Cardozo is doing amazing work in this area, and a number of others as well, for sure. Former colleague Gabriel Shapiro is doing great work. And these are all just emerging questions. But as an ethics matter, lawyers do need to take a certain step back and make sure that whatever advice is being given is being done in an appropriate way, because many decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, are combining with the first point and issuing tokens, and advice is being sought about whether those quote unquote governance tokens are securities or not. So it's an area where really the highest degree of caution needs to be provided. It's not an area where you shouldn't practice, but where we need to be very cautious. I don't know, Yev, do you want to add anything just on that particular discussion? Because it's
I
really
would,
similar to me.
yeah, I mean, I think those are all great points, and I think you covered it really well. I think just because it kind of it is as an ancillary point
Yeah.
to some of the work that's being done in this space in terms of development of DAOs and what open law is doing. And I second my conversation with Aaron Wright at the at ETH Denver earlier this year, which was just he's brilliant
Yep.
with what he's doing. So very much second that. And then if you caught some of the special committee session yesterday with what's happening with legal smart contracts, and which we'll get onto soon enough, but this area is really changing. Like, you should, if you're tuning in, like, there are new opportunities opening up for legal engineers. There are new entities being created. I think earlier today, maybe, or even at the select committee, they were talking about what was some of the laws that were being introduced in Vermont with the blockchain. What is it? Blockchain Limited Liability Company, I think it was.
Yeah,
Something
I
like
think
that.
that's what they call it.
I mean,
Yeah, Vermont has been very active in this space. And there's a gentleman there, Oliver Goodenough, who's done some really great work, and they're at the absolute forefront of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is watch the space or participate in this space, because there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here. But obviously, again, bearing in mind and taking it back to the professional responsibility that you hold as an attorney, and the ethics considerations that do often arise with respect to some of this bleeding edge technology.
Yep.
So, Louis, I'll let you take the floor on this one, because this is the most exciting slide of our whole entire presentation.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that yet, but thank you. Yeah, so your quote early on from the DC bar ethics observation that Bitcoin is somehow dirty money, and anyone involved in it must be, or is likely to be, equally dirty. And I think seeing the activity in Congress in terms of legislation, or draft legislation in most cases, that is really designed to help develop the use of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies is extremely heartening. So a Forbes report, which was the latest, sort of all-in report I could find, identified 32 separate bills that were pending in Congress that were generally involved blockchain and cryptocurrency. Now, in fairness, a number of those, were on the more negative side of trying to present concerns, but the vast bulk were really trying to help facilitate the use of blockchain and cryptocurrency, and in a number of important ways. And in many cases, they were actually designed to help the government use blockchain technology for the government's own work, which is very, very important. And of course, yesterday, for those who've been following, two really fascinating bills were introduced into Congress in the House, both with bipartisan support. The first was a bill that was designed to create a unified body of law for digital asset exchanges under the aegis of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, and that would be a huge step forward in regularizing the exchanges that are now essential to the use of digital assets. And then a second bill introduced by Congressman Tom Emmer that I was fortunate to help a little bit with, which was designed to clarify what has been a very difficult issue of law in terms of whether blockchain tokens themselves should in many cases be considered securities. And there are strong feelings on either side of this, which I absolutely recognize. But the bill, if adopted, would seek to clarify and settle those matters by mandating through an amendment to the Securities Act of 1933 that a new definition which would be added to the law, which is an investment contract asset. And the investment contract asset is the asset sold pursuant to an investment contract. When we look back at the 70 plus years of the Howey case, what we see is several hundred different cases along the way, all of which follow a similar pattern. There's an ostensible commercial transaction that does not involve the sale of securities, where one person is selling something to someone else, and the something that's sold has varied tremendously. Orange groves, most notably in the case of Howey itself, but also animals grown for their pelts, earthworms in one case, whiskey in a number of cases. Those were very popular investment schemes. But in all cases, the asset sold, generally speaking, was not itself a security. The scheme was, and if the asset itself, independent of any rights and promises of the scheme, were resold, that asset would be recognized as not a security. Digital assets have muddied the water because they are a bit unique, and their relationship to the scheme is a bit different. But this legislation, if adopted, would clarify that unless the digital asset independently had the characteristics of a security, for example, it paid dividends or had voting rights, then the digital asset would not be a security. What this would mean is that a large number of other digital assets should be able to be traded on regulated crypto exchanges and really complement the work of the first bill by creating a meaningful marketplace for digital assets that can be used for a wide variety of purposes, which are essential because digital assets, are something that some people like to invest in, other people want to use, and having liquid markets in which they can be traded is essential to their success. So we'll see where that goes. But as you say, Yev, it was an exciting day yesterday in the crypto community with the introduction of those two pieces of legislation.
Very, very exciting indeed, and just and critical. I mean, we as attorneys have been calling for clarity on a federal level for a very long time. And as you mentioned, there have been a number of bills that have been introduced and flopped. In the Cryptocurrency Act 2020, which was a bill introduced in March and followed on the December bill, has also been by commentators predicted to unfortunately fail, but hasn't been decided on as yet. So, and it basically calls on, again, more clarity in the law, dividing cryptocurrencies into three main categories or groups, with synthetic derivatives, crypto commodities, and crypto securities. I won't go into it too much, but I would encourage you to look at it as well. I think that the one that Lewis worked on is a lot more exciting, and it's a lot more refined. Just given the experience that we all now have, the practical experience that we all now have. And I'm conscious of time, so I want to make sure that we cover just a general note on smart contracts and legal smart contracts and the role of attorneys in managing them. Lewis, I don't know if you have anything particular to say just about controlling from an ethical perspective, from an ethical compliance perspective with respect to legal smart contracts.
It's a great question, Yev, and what we have seen so far, at least with smart contract code in a lot of cases, are very sort of lightly regulated code operating particularly in the area of decentralized finance and potentially covering large value transactions, but where no lawyer or lawyers advice is being sought. But as smart contract technology has demonstrated that it works, our expectation, I think, and your slide here is great because it sort of sets up a wide variety of places in which this technology can be used, will become more mainstream. And I personally prefer the term automation to smart contract. I think the term smart contract often can confuse people as to what actually is happening, but it's sort of deterministic automation and advising clients who are going to engage in what you might call deterministic automation, there are interesting ethical questions that arise, in particular as to competence. So if a client is entering into a traditional written contract, you would expect it to be written in a language, for example, that the lawyer understands. So, for example, the English language. But many of us speak other languages. I'm going to guess, Yev, you've got a couple up your sleeve yourself. So you might feel comfortable if a client wanted to enter a Colorado-based contract in a second language that you were fluent in, and you would be able to understand it, advise them, and for whatever reason that language was chosen, you would be able to advise on what the contract said, what its nuances were, and give advice. You would be competent to do that. But let's say the client sought to enter into an agreement that was purportedly going to have meaningful economic consequences for them, and it was written in a language you did not understand or not fluent in, whatever that might be. You would, I think, immediately identify and say, hold on a second, I can't advise you because you're seeking to create a binding legal relationship using a language that I cannot myself understand, and therefore I cannot advise you. So why is it that we think as lawyers, if you are using computer code to create a similar sort of economic arrangement, if the lawyer is not immediately familiar with the code and understanding how the code works and what it does, that you're competent to advise the client? So there's some really interesting questions about knowledge on the part of lawyers of the underlying code. As most of you will know, in the case of the Ethereum network, that's Solidity, and we're jumping ahead.
Sorry. We just got 1 minute, so I'm just
okay. So anyway, those are just some important considerations there, and I'll let you pick up the last on an enterprise, and then we'll peace out, I think.
Yeah, so really this slide just highlights everything else that we've spoken about, and the lawyer's duty to be vigilant and to be mindful of privacy issues, securities issues, criminal intellectual property and contract all across the board, really, if you're in-house. But mostly consult with outside counsel on specialist areas, as you would anyway. And manage, and there's a lot of compliance policies and risk management measures that you can put in place into your systems as well. So that's sort of kind of the general overview. Louis, if you had to say one last word about what to be on the what's trending and that you should, as a lawyer, be on the watch for.
I think I briefly flagged DeFi. That's probably the biggest thing going on right now, and raises a lot of concerns. I just on Twitter earlier today saw somebody published an anonymous article about all the problems in DeFi, which are absolutely involved ethical issues, so I think that's an area where lawyers in the space will get a lot of client inquiries, but also have to have the highest degree of care and scrutiny before kind of wading into.
Yeah. And my last few words would be just the secondary markets that are being created from the issuance of utility tokens and what's to be expected there. I think I'm warm to it for a lot of reasons, but obviously we do need a little bit of regulatory guidance as well around those areas. So it's been a lot of fun, and thank you to everybody for sticking around with us. If you have, if not, make sure to watch the recorded version.
Exactly. Yeah, no, thank you, Yev. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks to Rich and the team at the WYO Hackathon, and of course, always when we're talking Wyoming, a super shout out to our good friend Caitlin Long, and for all the amazing things she's done for the state of Wyoming and the crypto community. Caitlin, you're amazing. So
yes, I second that. And then I also want to say hi to Tyler if he's listening.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots to lock in your next adventures, Tyler. There's going to be many good things coming,
yes,
I'm sure.
Definitely. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.